Your lecturer is Stephen Gimble. Dr. Gimble is a professor of philosophy at Gettysburg College, where he also served as the chair of the philosophy department. He received his PhD in philosophy from Johns Hopkins University. At Gettysburg College, Dr. Gimble has received the Luther W. and Bernice L. Thompson Distinguished Teaching Award and was named to the Edwin T. and Cynthia Shearer Johnson Chair for Distinguished Teaching in the Humanities. He has published several books, including Isn't That Clever? A Philosophical Account of Humor and Comedy.
Welcome to the series, Take My Course, Please, the Philosophy of Humor. For 24 lectures, we will discuss fish. I am Peter Fong, Professor of Biology at Gettysburg College. Here at the Great Courses, we thought that the topic of humor would sell better than ichthyology, so when we marketed our series on the biology of fish, we changed the title, hoping it would increase sales. If you wanted a course in humor, the joke's on you. Fish or humor, either way, you have to consider the scales of justice. I am, of course, only joking. This is a course on the philosophy of humor. I'm not Peter Fong, my colleague who is a professor of biology at Gettysburg College. Rather, I am Steve Gimble, a professor of philosophy there. In this course, we will examine examples of human behavior like what I just did, and ask whether the claim that I was only joking is in fact true. Was that a joke? Was I thereby joking? What does it mean for something to be a joke? I will admit that it was not terribly funny. Does that mean it was a bad joke? Does the lack of funniness mean it wasn't a joke at all? Does the lack of funniness mean I may have intended to joke, but I failed? Is a joke in the desire or in the reception? Am I off the moral hook for saying something if I said it as a joke? Are some jokes, like pretending to misrepresent a product, inherently immoral? Philosophers have been writing about humor at least since Plato in the 4th century BCE. But it's only in the last couple of decades or so that the philosophy of humor has been recognized as a legitimate subfield of philosophy with professional organizations and a blossoming literature. Why did it take so long for philosophy of humor to emerge, especially since humor is everywhere people are? In part, I believe, it's the result of an equivocation. Equivocation is the logical error in which we change the meaning of a word in the middle of an argument. Philosophers have been disinclined to take humor seriously because humor is, by definition, not serious. But the two uses of the word serious involve different meanings. In the first case, taking something seriously means that there are important insights to be gleaned from an understanding of the thing. But the second sense of serious, that humor is, by definition, not serious, means that humor is lighthearted or pleasurable. Now, this may be true, but simply because it's not serious in this way does not mean it's not serious in the first sense. Something being funny and entertaining does not at all indicate that it's philosophically vacuous. Indeed, to the contrary, we've come to realize that humor is chock full of philosophical goodness, that there's an expansive range of philosophical questions raised by this ubiquitous human behavior, and we'll discuss them here. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Dwayne.
Dwayne who?
Dwayne the tub. I'm dwowning.
No!
Compare that with this one. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Dwayne.
Dwayne who?
Dwayne Hickman, the actor who used to play Dobie Gillis on television.
Ever heard of him?
Really? The first one was a joke. Was the second one? It was of the same form. So does that make it a joke? Just a bad one? Or was it not a joke at all? Is it missing something necessary for an utterance to be a joke? Philosophy, especially analytic philosophy, always begins its examination of a topic with the definitional question. For us, that's what is humor? Philosophers take it as their charge to work out rigorous definitions of central notions. And in philosophy of humor, we want to know exactly what it is that separates humorous acts from non-humorous ones. For this purpose, philosophers have concocted humor theories, that is, sets of necessary and sufficient conditions that are claimed to define the concept of humor. Morty Rosenberg, he's crossing the street, gets hit by a car. A man on the sidewalk sees it. He rushes over, lays him down, takes his jacket off, puts it under his head. He says, "Are you comfortable?" Morty looks up and says, "I make a living." This is clearly a Jewish joke. That raises interesting ethical questions. Am I allowed to tell the joke because I'm Jewish? Does it matter? Suppose it had a sharper tone, playing even stronger on Jewish stereotypes. On the one hand, we use joking as a moral excuse. "I was only joking" is meant to excuse us for the content of what we've just said. It wasn't said seriously, only as a joke. So, on this view, humor is outside the bounds of morality. On the other hand, we often hear joke tellers condemned for telling certain kinds of jokes. Are there immoral jokes? Are there jokes that are morally limited in who can tell them, to whom they can be told, and where and when they can be told? There are also aesthetic questions. What makes for a good joke? Is the only artistic purpose of a joke to get laughs? Do we also judge jokes epistemologically? Are some jokes good jokes because they're true? What does truth mean for jokes? There are social political questions that arise when we consider humor. Is humor a tool for the oppressed to bring otherwise ignored viewpoints into the public discourse? Think of the comedy of Dick Gregory or Richard Pryor. Or is humor a tool of the powerful to keep the oppressed down? Do insult comedians like Don Rickles entrench harmful stereotypes that hamper the social advancement of particular minority groups? Does it matter if the comedian targets everyone equally? Does the presence of and attitude towards humor in a culture tell us anything about the culture itself? Does the style of humor most prevalent in a society tell us anything about that society? In this series, we'll look at all of these questions and more. In the first third of the course, we'll look at the universality and objectivity of humor, the role of truth in humor, and specifically look at the forms of jokes, irony, satire, and the relation between humor and tragedy. The second 8 lectures will focus on humor theory. That is the question of the definition of humor. We want to be able to formulate clear and rigorous conditions by which we can determine whether something is or is not humor. We'll set out and evaluate the major humor theories from the classical to the contemporary. Finally, the last third will examine the questions of ethics in humor. We'll look at ethnic jokes and dirty jokes and ask if there are inherently immoral jokes or if there are places and times where the telling of certain or any joke would be morally problematic. We will see if professional comedians have different moral standards than we do when making jokes in normal conversation. We will ask whether a sense of humor is necessary for a well-lived human life and the role that humor plays in making us human. Humor is a multifaceted, intricate philosophical concept. It may be fun to hear and tell jokes, but that pleasure in no way means that there's not plenty of humorous grist for the philosophical mill. There is. So, let us begin to grind it now. Humor is a rich philosophical topic precisely because it seems to be everywhere. If you find humans, you will find humor. It may not be obvious at first. It may be subtly hidden, clear only to those on the inside who are able to spot sly twists of language or behavior. But if there are people, there is humor. It seems as if it's biologically a part of us to be funny. Indeed, the earliest Western theory of human anatomy is where we get the term humor. Although it traces all the way back to classical Greece, the humor theory is most closely associated with the Roman physician Galen. According to this account, the human body has in it 4 important fluids: blood, phlegm, and black and yellow bile. These are called the humors. Each of these fluids has a role in maintaining life. The key for good health is balance. You need to have just the right amount of each of the humors within you at any time to have the body work properly. Too much or too little of any of the humors, and the result is illness, both physical and psychological. Depression, for example, called melancholy back then, was caused by too much black bile. Mania, on the other hand, was the result of too much blood. If you ever wondered why classical medicine included leeches for bleeding people, this is why. Too much blood, it was thought, could be harmful to one's health, and therefore there would be circumstances in which it would be necessary for the promotion of wellness to eliminate some of the blood from the patient. Some people's individual biology would have a natural proclivity to over or underproduction of some of the humors. That's why different people have different personalities. Some people are naturally more impulsive, while others are more innately worried. Some people are inherently jovial, while others are naturally gloomy. It was the result of the production of the humors, and thus became identified as one's humor. A proper alignment would put one in a good humor, and that was a state of pleasant enjoyment of life. Thus, laughter and merriment came to be associated with good humor, which linguistically was reduced simply to the term humor. We, of course, no longer use the humor theory to explain the functioning of the human body. But we will see in the lecture after next how biology and psychological development do play into the universality of humor. We are wired to find things funny. We'll discuss this in more detail in that lecture to come, but for now, just think of what is probably the first joke all of us experience. Peekaboo. No sooner do we acquire the ability to understand that things we can no longer see still exist than we use it for a joke. We show a thing, we hide the thing, we then make the thing reappear. The result in the youngest humans? Smiles, laughter, giggles of delight. And the older human playing the joke? The urge to give more rise to more smiles, more laughter, ever more intense giggling. As a species, we love to laugh and we love to make other people laugh. That this is a property of the species as a whole can be seen by looking both in space and time. When we look around the globe and we look back through history, what we find is that if there are people, there is humor. We can find comedic television programs broadcast from every country. If there's a culture, there is humor there. While all cultures have humor, it's a question of whether they all mean the same thing by humor. Cultural relativism is the view that the concept of humor is culture dependent. What is meant by the notion of humor in one culture, say in southern Mexico, is different from what is meant by humor in a different culture, say in southern India. The main piece of evidence that the cultural relativists point to is the fact that we often do not get or do not find funny the humor of other cultures. Locals may find something hilarious, but visitors will not even realize that there has been a joke made. British may prefer subtle wordplay, whereas Germans may prefer schadenfreude-inducing situations. Humor is a cultural product, and the different cultures will produce different concepts of humor. Universalists, on the other hand, will contend that we need to understand that there is a difference between humor and the content of humor. It may be true that specific jokes require background knowledge. For example, if you don't know local fashion customs, you would not realize that someone was dressed inappropriately. But while the meat of the joke may be local, the skeleton of the joke, the formal structure, may be one of a sort that's found cross-culturally. When you get food in southern Mexico and in southern India, the seasonings will be different. The vegetables grown will be different, whether there's meat and from which animals may be different. But while the food in southern Mexico and southern India tastes different, this does not entail that they mean different things by the word food. Similarly, the Universalists will argue that how different cultures prepare their humor, what they mean by humor, the underlying notion remains the same. Humor is like food. La comedia is like la comida in this sense. So, is the underlying nature of humor different in different cultures? Turns out that this is not a philosophical question, but a scientific one. It requires investigation into the world and its humor. I'm currently working with a colleague of mine who's an anthropologist to try and test this question. We're putting together a set of videos which we'll show to people in different parts of the world and ask them for each video on a scale of 1 to 5, A, if it is intended to be humorous, and B, if it was in fact humorous. We want to see if the results are consistent or inconsistent in different parts of the world. Of course, the results will not settle the matter. The effects might come from particularities of the videos we construct. They may come from globalization, in which American-type humorous and non-humorous videos have infected other cultures through the online world, which is largely controlled by Western culture. But the hope is that the data will at least contribute to a new result relevant to the discussion. That cross-pollination is limited if we look at different times instead of different places. The internet had very little influence, for example, on the ancient Greeks. The modems in classical antiquity were notoriously slow, but we do find humor there. The Greek comedies were a staple of the popular theater of the times. Great writers like Aristophanes produced humor-filled works that still resonate with audiences. His play Lysistrata, for example, has the women of Greece band together and go on an affection strike, cutting off their husbands from all physical interactions until war stops. It's a comic device that you find today on network sitcoms like Everybody Loves Raymond. Aristophanes' play The Clouds lampoons the great philosopher Socrates as a bumbling egghead who's supposedly brilliant but buffoonish in his ability to deal with day-to-day life. In this way, it's not terribly different from The Absent-Minded Professor or The Big Bang Theory. Like comedy in Greece, Roman comedy was in deep ways very much like the comedy of today. We not only find brilliant examples of cleverness in the oratory of Cicero, one of the oldest collections of jokes we know comes from Roman times, probably about the 4th century CE, although it might be a bit older. We know it was written sometime during the reign of the Roman Empire because there are Roman references in some of the jokes, but it was written in the Greek language and titled Philogelos. Philo is Greek for love, and gelos means laughter. So Philogelos is one who loves to laugh, and is sometimes translated as the Joker. It's a collection of 256 jokes, which could have been transcribed from the routine of a Borscht Belt comic in the 1950s or found in a Bazooka Joe comic.
Why are you looking in the mirror with your eyes closed? I want to see what I look like asleep. A man asked a fortune teller how his family is. The soothsayer said that they are all doing well, especially his father. My father's been dead for years. Ah, said the fortune teller, you don't know who your real father is. Chatty barber asked his customer how he wanted him to cut his hair. Customer responded in silence. That guy knows.
The cultural relativist will want to argue that the notion of humor is particular to a place and a time. Different cultures have different notions of humor. This book, Philogelos, shows a stunning degree of continuity in humor. It may be the case that our notion of humor develops as a result of the development of Western civilization directly from the Greeks and Romans, and therefore their humor, being the ancestor of ours, should be related. But in different corners of the globe, different conceptions of humor would arise. Native American tribes in the Southwest included sacred clowns in their healing ceremonies. Dressed up in silly outfits with makeup on their faces, they would play pranks and act in ways designed to elicit mirth in those needing to be healed. In ceremonies that lasted many hours that were filled with otherwise serious, sacred incantations designed to invoke the gods, and dances that brought the entire community around the ill to create a sense of social cohesion, there was also comedy inserted as a necessary part of the ritual. The courts of classical China were like those of Renaissance Europe in once having court jesters. This was a position of great power, as the jester was often the only one who could speak truth to power. It was often only the fool who could tell the truth to the emperor and get him to listen to other viewpoints or to question his judgment. Famous amongst these is Chun Yu Kun, who is renowned as a Confucian philosopher and as a court jester. He was supposed to be the quickest of wits, who never missed a chance for a joke and never lost an argument. He was able to employ riddles when he wanted to challenge the emperor's decisions. In that way, he could make clear the error of the emperor's thinking while never having to directly challenge him. So, we see humor in the social structures and products of the classical world around the globe. We see it also in the Abrahamic religious tradition. The book of Genesis, after all, begins with a joke. What does God do on the first day? He makes light of the entire universe. Now, that joke might make some people uncomfortable. Making a joke about a sacred text? Is that sacrilege? Does the act of making a joke about something change the thing? Are there some things we cannot make jokes about? This is an ethical question. We'll take this up in great detail in the last third of this series. But for now, we can ask a question about a version of that question in a larger social context. Do jokes about that which is revered in a society impinge upon the reverence? To those in power, it will often seem to be so. Humor is seen as a subversive force in society. The source of this power seems to come from three elements. The first is that we often use humor to degrade something. We can say something nasty, but if you really want it to sting, make it into a comic insult. In ancient Greece, for example, if you were insulted with a joke and made an object of public ridicule, it was expected that you would exact some sort of violent revenge. To be the butt of a joke is to be diminished. If you're a powerful leader, then your subjects making fun of you reverses the power dynamic and makes you inferior to those you supposedly rule over. The second is that the nature of many jokes is to invoke a frame shift or some other mechanism that forces you to see the familiar in a way that's unusual. If your power comes from having people see things the way you want them seen, anything that implies that there are multiple interpretations which may need to be entertained is a threat. Finally, humor often comes from the disaffected. Sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois wrote of a double consciousness that members of a minority group will be forced to adopt. Everyone sees the world through the concepts of the powerful, but those in the out-group will also have their own sense of the world. This bifocal way of being often leads to the ability to create humor out of the conflicts between these two ways of seeing. The humor then elevates those people that the system is trying to keep down. Humor is one way the downtrodden can inject their voice into the larger discourse in a way that's not unpleasant to those in the in-group, and that can be the camel's nose under the tent. As such, humor can be seen in some societies as a threat. In others, it's regarded as a virtue. Funny people are more sociable, more intelligent, more clever. The humorous are to be celebrated. We can classify societies along a continuum, with one extreme being scholastic, that is, embracing humor as a healthy expression of life. Remember that laughter in Greek is gelos, so scholastic means humor-friendly. On the other extreme, we refer to it by scholars as agholastic. In these societies, humor is seen as unhealthy, undesirable, and the mark of vice, sin, or evil. Humor is to be avoided according to the norms of the aglastic society. We can think of this along the lines of early sociologist Petrim Sorokin's distinction between ideational and sensate cultures. A society is ideational, according to Sorokin, if it seeks truth in the spiritual, in the abstract, in the structure of a system. A society is sensate if it seeks truth in the material, in the worldly, in the experiential. The ideational society is one where the core commitment to principles, values, and belief. They regard fidelity to those ideas and ideals as central to being a true member of the society. If you must sacrifice for these values, then the depth of your sacrifice is a mark of your true commitment. The sensate society is one where what is real is what's valuable, what is important, and it's that which is tangible. It's the ends that are important, and the means are worthwhile or not based upon how successful they are. Sensate societies tend to be more pragmatic. Rules are fine if they work. If they don't, and you just stick to the rules just because that's your duty, then you seem absurd. The rules are not ends in themselves, only tools. And if one tool does not do the job, then you ought to find a better tool. According to Sorokin, individual societies change over time, oscillating between the ideational and the sensate. In an ideational society, where rules are seen as absolute, the failures of the rules and the success of those who break them over those who adhere completely will lead to a reversion to a sensate approach. But the pragmatism of the sensate society will lead people to yearn for an order that requires social structure, and the society will turn back towards the ideational. The social cycle repeats itself, with the society moving back and forth between being rigidly rule-based with an appreciation for order and a structure and a free-form embrace of freedom and creativity. In a similar fashion, we can think of some societies as scholastic and others as aglastic. The difference here is similar to that pointed out by Sorokin, but subtly different. As in Sorokin's model, where the society seeks truth can be seen as an indicator of which part of the continuum the society occupies. But instead of looking to abstract rules or pragmatic gains, the difference here is whether the society looks at truth as an object or the result of a process. Object-oriented societies will see truth as fixed, as a thing unto itself. There is a single unique truth, and one must know it and live accordingly to it. To question the truth is to undermine its importance and authority. Process-oriented societies see truth as the end result of a process. Truth is not something you're given, but something you discover. We may never have absolute truth, but by properly engaging in the right sort of cognitive endeavor, we will be led closer and closer to it. These process-oriented societies tend to be more scholastic. Societies that place the emphasis on the messy, exciting, frustrating means of uncovering the truth will also be those for which humor will be consistent with their way of seeing the world. Switching viewpoints between incompatible contenders and seeing things in different ways will be both part of life in society and in humor. In these societies, humor tends to be more open. Everything is free to be mocked or twisted without fear of reprisal. One needs to be able to take a joke as well as tell one. There's a playful, carefree clowning that can be embraced. Think of the Italian comic Roberto Benigni or the American comedian Robin Williams. Humor is seen as a mark of cleverness, and cleverness is an aid in finding truth. The humorous person is the smart person, and the smart person is more likely to be able to carry out the important cognitive processes involved in discovery and success. So, humor is embraced. Object-oriented societies, on the other hand, tend to be aglastic. In these societies, there's a fixed and absolute truth. Making jokes requires shifting the mind from one viewpoint to another, and that means at least one of them is a false view. Humor is a dangerous device which pulls the mind away from that which it should believe. It places the focus not on the truth, that which the mind perceives, but instead on the body. In agolastic societies, the humorous person is the undisciplined person. People are given to fits of laughter, and when you're giggling, you can't think of anything else. You lose control of your body. You become useless, incapable of doing anything. To indulge the comic is to be a buffoon. It's to reject the temperate, the spiritual, and give yourself over to the fleeting, the momentary, the unimportant. To reject seriousness is to become an unserious person. Humor in an agolastic society exists, but it's frowned upon. As such, it becomes an underground phenomenon, shared between those who recognize each other as mutually safe. The humor is often dark and pointed, exposing flaws in those in power in a hushed tone. A classic from Soviet times.
A judge comes out of a courtroom, laughing out loud, and the comrade asks him, "What's so funny?" "I just heard the funniest joke." "So what is this, the funniest joke?" "What, are you crazy? I just gave the guy 10 years hard labor for this telling the joke."
One should not take the religiosity of a culture to imply a scholastic status, as there are both object and process-oriented approaches to religion. Zen Buddhism, for example, teaches through paradoxical koans that forces the mind to wrestle with seemingly inconsistent and competing understandings. The Jewish Talmudic tradition, with its multiple interpretations of Torah passages, likewise is quite process-oriented. That's not to say there are not Buddhists and Jewish thinkers who adopt an object-oriented approach. Similarly, there are object-oriented and process-oriented approaches to Christian theology. Nor can atheists be put on one side or the other. One could be a Stalin-esque object-oriented atheist, or one could be more scientific in approaching life. We cannot simply map metaphysics onto this grid. What we do tend to find is a correlation between being more process-oriented and being more open to the value of humor and thus more scholastic. While those who are more object-oriented see humor as an indication of an ethical flaw and therefore are more ascholastic. However, we're not making any claims here in terms of one being right and the other being wrong, or one being better than the other. It's simply a descriptive claim about the large-scale understanding and socio-political place of humor within the society. Is humor inherently socially harmful or helpful? Like so much else in philosophy, the answer is, it depends. What we want to avoid is a pitfall a number of philosophers of humor have fallen into, oversimplifying humor and laughter by painting too sunny a picture of it. Humor is complicated. Sometimes it's a wonderful thing that brings joy and can add pleasure to life. But it can also be used as a weapon. Humor is a multifaceted phenomenon, and the key for this series is to represent it faithfully as such. So, off we go to more humor, more analysis, and more questions that we may or may not answer. Welcome to philosophy.